Mysterious Universe, my conference 2024. It will happen next year on the 13th of September 2025. It's part of my book promotion for The Secret History of Stonehenge, and in that book I cover many things. I certainly started a stir recently when a couple of years ago I started to lecture on the 2 altar stones that were at Stonehenge according to antiquarians. Recently some researchers have claimed they have found them at Berwick St James. Archaeologists ruled this out about 20 years ago because they're limestone. What I found was the deposits, the shards, the remains of several different types of little remains that were from one stone. So you've got all of these separate little chip-ins, if you will, and they were a darker sandstone. So I don't think the second altar stone has been found yet. We're still looking for it. And I got a suspicion where it is. So I discussed the altar stones at Stonehenge. I then went on to talk about musical harmonics, and perhaps in the background you can hear the music of John Dalton. He was a speaker that followed me, because in my search to understand ancient sites I realized that music played a very deep role, and what the ancients knew was how to incorporate sacred geometry into Stonehenge. And I've studied sacred geometry now, and it's a 12-pointed star. This was first discovered by John Michell, and I tweaked the model a little bit and discovered that if you use that 12-pointed star, every single circular feature at Stonehenge falls into place, every single one. So it's a 12-pointed star. And I mentioned music. How on earth can music be integrated into Stonehenge? Mathematics, because an octave, for example, is 2/1, and a major third is called 5/4 in maths. But in music, 5/4 is the major third. And if you stand in between the lintel stone circle and the bluestone circle today, you're in that harmonic of the major third. So what does the major third do? It raises our consciousness. And that's why Christians incorporate the major third into their musical aspect in cathedrals, churches, chapels. It tends to be that key and that note. So I discussed different types of musical harmonics. I then discussed in my talk about stone programming and how stone programming can be placed into a stone by literally just tapping it with a hammer. This was first discovered by the master dowser called Tom Lethbridge. Tom Lethbridge realized that if you tapped stone like that, it would retain a bionic charge. What's a bionic charge? It's my polarity. If I bang a stone or hold a stone, it retains a female charge. And if a male bangs a stone or holds a stone, it contains a male charge. And this was an archaeologist from Cambridge. He went on to say, if you really impact a stone time and time again, like they were worked at Stonehenge into those lozenge shapes, then you can program that stone. And if you can program that stone, what are we going to program it with? I think of the 2 altar stones, they were programmed to receive healing in one. So one of the altar stones I think was about healing, and it was in a myth that the god Apollo, the god of healing, comes to Stonehenge round about the time of the winter solstice. Time and again he said to have left Delphi in Greece, arrives, materializes at Stonehenge. Now I think he did materialize, but it's a fleeting corner of the eye glimpse through the stone programming that allows us to tap, tap, tap. You're pushing in an image, pushing in some sound, and that will release it. How do you release the image? And that's where I think if you can program stone that has these defect lattices, if you can program the stone, and those defect lattices are like a semiconductor, they can record things. So I think at Stonehenge, one was about the healing through the god Apollo. That was the darkest stone that got stolen by King James I, George Villiers, when they excavated there. And the other stone was programmed for divination. One was male and one was female. One was light and one was dark. So what about the divination there? Well, it was recorded by John Wood in the 18th century, for instance, that there was oracles being told at Stonehenge, right by the altar stone itself. So where I say there was two, archaeologists would disagree with this. I think, like I said, one was healing with an energy field and one was for oracles. And guess what I discovered at Stonehenge in a round barrow? Rune stones. Long before the Anglo-Saxons came here, I discovered that there were symbols that I think were used for divination by the oracle stone. More than that. About 5,300 BC, from Transylvania, there was discovered the Tartarian tablets. What are those? They are inscriptions with linear lines and markings that Maria Gimbutas said was a metaphysical language. So imagine we've got these tablets long before cuneiform text of ancient Sumer, and where did I find them? At Avebury. Identical. And I said in my talk, if you put the Tartarian tablets next to the Avebury tablet, they're identical. I think this was a form of divination being used. And like I said, a metaphysical alphabet. So I see lots of different things going on at Stone Circle. For instance, there's healing, there's oracles. And at Stonehenge, with all of those stones worked through the stone programming, they were programmed to release images. Now, I mentioned sound, that if you stand in between the lintel stone circle and the blue stone, you're in the major third. Now, if we can program stone, which archaeologists such as Dr. Anne Ross agreed with, and Dr. Don Robbins agreed with, and Dr. Havelock Fiddler, and Lethbridge. These are all archaeologists that are saying stone program is possible. This isn't just me saying it. And that's why I think light comes into play. Why are some stones aligned to the summer solstice? Why are some stones aligned to the winter solstice sunset? Because there's an ancient technology at play, and I think I've discovered it. And that ancient technology is this. When a sun sets or a sun rises, there's red light, isn't there? We all are familiar with a beautiful red sunset, but there's more to it than that. In that red light, you have microwaves and radio waves, and microwaves can be transduced. That means changed. And if it passes through, if these microwaves that can be transduced pass through a piezoelectrical material, that's Stonehenge stones, incidentally, then they become pressure, push pressure through the atmosphere, and it becomes sound, ultrasound. So I think stones are aligned to a sunrise or sunset, not because it's a pretty vision, it is, but because they're using this ancient technology of those microwaves being transduced. So there's ancient technology there as well. And this light factor of triggering these stones, I think allows this ultrasound to come out. Well, has it been recorded? Yes, it has, by Dr. Don Robbins. As part of the Dragon project, he went to the Rollright Ring in Oxfordshire, where my tour is going tomorrow, and he recorded ultrasound. But the ultrasound wasn't coming from the stones into the centre of the stone circle. The ultrasound was going out, as if irrigating the landscape with its invisible, unheard sound. Because we hear at 20 hertz. Ultrasound's much higher, and some animals could hear that, a bit like infrasound is low, ultrasound is high. So I'm seeing at these ancient sites more than just an alignment to a sunrise, alignment to a sunset. It's absolutely incredible, the wisdom of the ancients. And also, I think the elongated skull people I discovered in Stonehenge to begin with, and now far across Europe, they had their ears offset. They were not where our ear placements are. This was recorded by anthropologists time and again. Their ears were offset. I gave a report to a doctor in London who came to Egypt with me on one of my tours there. And she said, Maria, this is impossible. What you're saying. I said, well, I've copy-cut pasted that from an anthropologist. What if that is true? And she said they'd hear different frequencies. Their ears are different. So I think the elongated skull people could hear the ultrasound and be able to interact with it. What's ultrasound used for today? Healing. Getting rid of inflammation. So I think that as well has a healing factor about it. And I really do think that the stone programming that was put into these stones at places like Avebury, at places like Stonehenge, was to record these images and use of ultrasound. But what I noticed at Avebury, the Ring of Brodgar, the stones of Stennes, just to name a few stone circles, they tend to have a stone with an angle like this. So if you imagine the stone is like this and it has an angle. You can see that today at the cove stones. With my knowledge of mathematics and sacred geometry, I realized one was 75 degrees and one was 105 degrees. That two figures represent, again, not just musical harmonics, which they do, but they're encoded into, for instance, the solar barge that takes Ra through the day and the night in ancient Egypt. You see those angles on his solar barge. You see them, like I said, at the stones of Stennes and Avebury. Why? It encodes a journey, and that journey is towards a lighter being, to raise our frequencies higher. So what happens then if I stood by one of these stones that has one of these angles? Well, your consciousness begins to change because those angles relate to harmonic music. And one of those harmonics is called the perfect fifth. And the perfect fifth allows all of your lymph fluid to flow. It allows your cells to be perfect. So standing stones can be very, very healing. And don't think, just when you go to a stone circle, why is that angle there? Everything in the ancient world had meaning. Nothing was by chance.